Welcome to Mazungumzo, African Scholarly Conversations, a podcast that highlights the perspectives of various stakeholders in academia and research fields across Africa through open dialogue or Mazungumzo on scholarly communication in Africa.
Welcome to Mazungumzo, African Scholarly Conversations, where we are joined by an expansive list of African policymakers, scholarly and science communication specialists, innovators, and tertiary institution leads who contribute to this realm of scholarly and science communication. I'm your host, Joy Owango, the Executive Director of the Training Center in Communication, Capacity Building Trust based at the University of Nairobi, Faculty of Science and Technology. Today, we are honored to sit with Alan Mukhwana, Head of Programs Science Knowledge in Society at the Science for Africa Foundation, based out of Nairobi, and a dedicated champion for equitable research partnerships and institutional strengthening across Africa. Alan leads programs at the Science for Africa Foundation that challenge the status quo, from the International Research Management Staff Development Program, which is also known as REMPRO Africa, both designed to reimagine how research management can truly serve African institutions. With over 15 years of experience in academia, NGOs, and the private sector, Alan brings a rich practical perspective on what it takes to move from short-term fixes to sustainable African-led systems change. Welcome, Alan. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you, Joy. It's my pleasure to be part of this conversation.
Fantastic. So let's start with your journey. How did you find yourself in the world of research management and building systems that support African science? What drew you in and kept you going?
That's interesting, Joy. So very briefly, I actually should say that I stumbled into research management because I was working with this Infectious Diseases Institute at Makerere University,
right,
doing research and communication for the AIDS Information Center. And at that point, at one point, I was requested by our head of institute to review the research program and look at there was a particular job within that research program, and they asked me if I could look at the job and whether I liked it or not. And so that's why I say I stumbled into research management. So on getting into research management, really, I had a pool of scholars, clinical scholars,
mm-hmm.
And I had several number of grants to do research, and there was also a good number of clinical trials going on. And so I got into research management from a very blind perspective because at the time, this is 2010, at the time there was no, like research management as a profession clearly outlined. And so I got into the position and started thinking about how do I organize this office that I've been given into an office that's going to add value to the institute, but also importantly to the scholars that were under my care. And so I started reading about research management because I had seen something from the US called the Society of Research Administrators International. And so I started reading what are the skill sets required and looking out for courses that I could take to upskill myself. But unfortunately, there was none. On the continent, we had one professional association, which was really in Southern Africa. And I couldn't be a member because I was in East Africa. And then, through all this, I decided to join international professional associations. And that's how really I upskilled myself to understand research management and then be able to support the scholars that were in my research program. So it was, you asked the question of what drew me to it. Like I said, it was really me stumbling into it. But once I stumbled in, I found it very interesting, very, very interesting.
Interesting. And I mean, like most careers, sometimes they find you or you find them. And when you got into research management, what were the first observations you noted that made you more passionate about it to the point that now it has become a career?
Thank you, Joe. That's an interesting question, really. So what happened is I wasn't in the clinical space, really, even if I
Mm,
was in the AIDS Information Treatment Center. My role there was really to organize clinicians within the city to respond to clinicians in the rural settings that didn't have access to resources. So I'm not a clinician, so clearly it was a new space. But now getting into research management, I had all these mostly clinical scholars who were setting up their studies, and I needed to understand what they're doing. You can't monitor someone if you don't understand what they're doing, right? You can't hold them accountable for deliverables if you don't understand their work. And so I took it upon myself to begin to understand what is it we are doing and what is it they are doing, what is it I'm doing for them, and how do I support them to deliver on their work so that the institute is really positioned as a research institute. And so I started reading around the USA Food and Drug Authority. I read about the Uganda National Council for Science and Technology, Uganda National Drug Authority, and started looking around East Africa. What's Kenya doing in this space? What's Tanzania doing? And I realized that there's actually a whole ecosystem that regulates research. Now, this regulatory ecosystem is what guides the researchers that I was working with, right? And yet, many of them actually had hard time to navigate that system. And so I decided to organize an office, like organize the office beyond the scholars, now to include to include beyond the clinical scholars, now to include other scholars or researchers at Makerere University in the College of Health Sciences. And so I decided to set up an office that would support the researchers generally. And all this was really about me getting in touch with different people, me reading around certain subjects, enrolling in a clinical research evidence-based medicine course just to understand clinical research and what we should be looking out for. And then I joined several associations where we met and had a lot of peer learning. And the peer learning skills are what I brought to my job. Fortunately, I was already enrolled for an MBA, an executive
Mm.
MBA, which really helped me shape how do you set up an office that's going to be sustainable
Right.
uh, in uh, in an institution that's not a profit making.
Mm.
And so that was what drew me in and actually anchored me into realizing that I'm able to set up something that will stand the test of time. And Joy, I can say happily that the office is still running.
Nice.
It has evolved over the years
Mm.
with new people and new technology. But it's a pride to say that I was part of the formation of what do we need in here. We need clinical monitors. Um, we need project support staff. We need someone to oversee what's happening with the grants teams,
Mm.
to look at what's the pipeline of researchers, because one of
Mm-hmm.
the challenges of researchers is that you have generations of very excellent researchers, and if you're not growing your pipeline with
Yep.
researchers to be mentored, then
Mm.
you end up with huge gaps
That's true.
in your pipeline. That, of course, affects your research income
Mm.
and therefore affects your operations. And so I was really fortunate to be in an environment where leadership appreciated my efforts, and I had very good conversations with my immediate supervisor, called Professor Yukari Manabe, and our executive director, who was Dr. Cochino. And so they did encourage me to be innovative and put resources at my disposal to think through how do we make the office sustainable. That meant how do we bring in staff, train them to support researchers? Meaning now you're creating a kind of research management staff that wasn't there before. And it doesn't matter what you call them, but as long as you're creating this cadre of staff that is supporting uh, the whole research enterprise, that means um, you really are creating a sustainable institution. And so for me, that gave me the courage to stay in research management all the way. The other point, actually, after I left the Infectious Diseases Institute, why I stayed in research management is because I saw a lot of potential on the African continent.
Right.
In two areas. One is that there was a lot of research being done, but really not very coordinated, right? And
Mm.
the researchers themselves were struggling to do everything. And so I realized that if we don't support them,
Mm.
they will quickly get out of the research space because it's a lot of work, right? And then the second opportunity I saw is a career path for people who want to be within the research space, but not necessarily conduct the research, right? You are part of the research enterprise. You support the researchers. You support in looking for the funding, scanning the environment to see where the funding is. You're part of the applications. You see the projects from start to finish, and you see the results, the publications, and then now later in life, the question for me is, so beyond the publication,
Mm.
what next? What do we do with
Mm.
that research? Yeah, and these are things you learn on the job,
Right.
life experience,
Mm.
in trying to grow the profession. And so I think at the moment at Science for Africa Foundation, one of my roles is really to work with partners on the continent to grow the profession, the research management profession. And that for me is really exciting, talking to the different professional associations, talking to university leaders about creating courses in this area, talking to regulatory bodies, the importance of harmonizing a profession so that we are able to support researchers so that there's lots of production of research and research. Yeah. And so that for me, that has kept me in this space for quite a long time.
Interesting. So you've led initiatives like the International Research Management Staff Development Program and the Research Management Program in Africa, aimed at addressing structural gaps in research support. Could you tell our listeners what these programs are all about, persistent challenges they aim to address, and how we might start to change these challenges?
Thanks, Joy. So the International Research Management Staff Development Program, IRMSDP for short, is actually a cultural and skills exchange program. And it's a partnership with the Association of Research Managers and Administrators UK, called AMAR. So in conceptualizing this program, one of the things we're looking at, the cultural and contextual differences between African institution and their especially global North partners. And in Africa, let me just put this in context. In Africa, at a university, there's certain culture that is not written anywhere, and if you're not within the universities, you may not understand the hierarchical nature of the university. And then there's a lot of nuances on who does what, right? So the research managers or administrators that had been recruited by universities, maybe I should say that several universities on the continent have realized the importance of research management and so have recruited a cadre of staff to do that. But now these staff are, in the larger scheme of things, are quote unquote junior staff. They don't influence policy or resource allocation in their universities. And so I realized that they are working with their global North partners who are more recognized as part of the research enterprise at the university, and they have a contribution to changes within the research environment. And so there's always delays or because of lack of understanding of where different people sit in the institution. And so for me, in conceptualizing this program was to say, we need this cultural exchange. One is that the UK research managers come to the African universities, immerse themselves in the institution, understand how things work, and then the African research managers also go to the UK universities, immerse themselves within the space, and so they both understand there's a skills transfer, but then there's also, importantly, contextual understanding, right? You can only collaborate if you understand each other. So
True.
that was one of the things. The second objective was really, if we are partnering with Global North partners, we must partner at the same level, because
Yep. True.
we both bring intellectual input
That's very true.
in the research. However, if our institutions are not well resourced with staff who understand that actually, just because this is a Global North partner, we are not inferior to them. They're coming to us because we have a lot to offer. Yes. Yes, we are not data collectors on the continent.
As I always say, that you're not glorified data collectors.
We are not. Our
Yeah.
PIs are not glorified data collectors. They are top-notch researchers, world-renowned, very intelligent. And so our institutions must be conducive for them to actually fulfill their potential. And so for me, this program was really to say to our research managers, this is a role you must play, and you must uphold your institution at the level it ought to be held. It's a giant, a knowledge giant. It's with intellectual giants, and so support them to fulfill that potential. And so this was such a success, and people really appreciated what we were trying to do, and we've had lots of support. And we are, still trying to look for funding to scale up this program, because the evaluations really showed that it was very appreciated, not just by the research managers in Africa, but also their UK counterparts, because then they began to understand the context in which their colleagues work, but importantly, that they can't do things at the last minute, sending proposals. Oh yeah, PA so and so, please sign off as part of this collaboration. No, we need to have intellectual input in any production of knowledge. Yeah,
that is very true. And with all said and done, what excites you about your current role at the Science for Africa Foundation, and how does that align with your broader vision for research in Africa, particularly research management, in the context of what you just shared with us, the projects you've shared with us?
Okay. I mean, this particular project is really, like I said, is addressing systemic disparities. And what we need to do is ensure fair and effective research collaborations. So equitable partnerships. To also realize that research managers are actually a core component of the research life cycle. And there's lots to contribute to it. That means our institutions should also be able to resource a cadre of staff to support the researchers beyond the infrastructure that is provided for researchers. And that the other exciting thing is that my work with institutional leaders like vice chancellors, deputy vice chancellors, directors of research is the understanding that our institutions are supposed to continue the research enterprise beyond the here and now. We must build research environments that attract even the young people to get into research. Research must be looked at as an exciting and attractive career that actually contributes to developing the continent, right? That our outputs in research are what will help us build our continent, and
Mm-hmm.
that actually we have very brilliant minds who we can attract to these institutions.
Right.
So really empowerment, supporting academics, research managers, and support staff to to ensure that our institutions are able to produce good research. Joy, I wanted to touch on equitable research partnerships, right?
Yes, please. Yes.
I think for me, it's about framing, framing on equitability in research relationships, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, we want to understand the global research context,
Yes.
right?
Yes. Yes.
The resource constrained settings versus the highly resourced settings. What
Mm.
are the challenges and how do we uh, look at some of these challenges? And you do realize that there's colonial legacies.
Yes. And there's colonial
Uh,
trauma to that.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly, because our institutions are thought to be inferior, right?
Mm.
Just
Mm.
because there's there's less resource, there's resource constraint,
Yes.
and so for me that is really something I'm looking at as part of my role, equitability in research, and that we now need to grow long-term visions,
Mm.
strategic positioning, robust research ecosystems for
Mm.
our institutions, right?
Yeah.
Uh, and that we must rethink
Right.
rankings in
Oh,
education.
yep.
Yeah, rankings
Mm.
of universities,
Mm.
education as a commodity. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
can we redefine what research excellence is? Can
Yes.
we acknowledge indigenous knowledge? You
Mm.
know? And so for me, it's really about reversing the lens.
Mm.
Equitable partnerships from a global southern perspective
Mm.
are really what I'm thinking through, and how we can achieve that.
I
Right.
think what you're actually telling me, it's about research integrity. It's when you talk about equitable partnerships, it's about integrity in these partnerships. Because for the longest time, uh, we have been perceived, when I say we, it's those of us in the global south,
Yeah.
we've been perceived as I said earlier, glorified data collectors. And we understand, we I don't say we understand, but we are cognizant of the challenges we face within our
Mm,
institute, whether it's infrastructural or human resource or even financial. So it's so
mm,
easy, unfortunately, to take advantage of those ecosystems or even laws that do not support proper research management ecosystems. So, or
yeah.
policies. So by the time you're talking about equitable research partnerships, it's also about telling our potential partners we need to get into these partnerships with an element of integrity. And
Yes.
uh, and it also speaks to one of the projects that we have at TCC, whereby we are training, working with various governments, but training research ethics and review boards on
Mm, mm,
equitable research practices, especially when it comes to publishing and partnerships. Because, when people look at integrity, they look at the integrity of the before the research. What
mm,
boxes should I tick so that everything is in line with the research and ethics review boards? But then it's always the whole sphere. How is this partnership? How are we going to
mm.
publish? What is our recognition in this process? So what you're talking about actually speaks true to some of the activities we are doing because yes, the colonial trauma is
It,
real,
it it
it
is,
is, yeah.
and it's subtle. Sometimes it's subtle in the way it's presented.
Oh, yes, the undertones, which are
The
even
under,
heavier than actual.
yes, and actually, when you think about it, why would Global North want to partner with Global South institutions. It's about the
Mm.
intrinsic value,
Mm,
you
mm,
know,
mm, mm,
scholarship, knowledge, feelings of achievement,
yeah.
that are, they view that they will get that from the Global South. And
And also
so what,
I also said there's also an element of colonial guilt.
yes, there's,
Oh wow, this is a tricky topic. Yes.
we need to,
Yeah,
we'll need to talk about decolonization of the
yeah,
mind and the knowledge
yeah,
systems another day,
yeah.
because it's a whole exciting area of work that we are venturing in and looking to understand how to break those
Mm, mm,
chains.
mm, 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 mm. So
But
also,
back to, yeah,
yes,
sorry,
yeah,
back
back to,
to an equitable partnership.
yeah.
We we want value attribution
Mm-hmm.
for everything that we
Mm,
do.
mm, mm, mm,
And
mm.
Joy, one of the things I insist on is that inequity is systemic.
Oh yes, it is.
This continues to contribute to systemic inequity,
Mm,
meaning that the power imbalance
mm,
that defines the relationships that we have, dominance of an exclusive research system
mm,
that defines the rules of the game,
mm,
right? Um, and so it defines knowledge production, which theories and approaches dominate research processes, whose knowledge counts.
oh yeah.
And then those relationships of tokenism, or because you have to have an African partner, and so, oh,
Yeah.
I know so and so, so I can send them the proposal 2 hours to the closing date and expect them to sign it off. So
Oh
it's
goodness, yeah.
yeah, it's perfect. What's performance really representation of, we are bringing in the underrepresented groups. You know,
Mm,
we are facilitating their institutions, and
mm,
but their systems are really not good
mm.
without that understanding. And that's why I
Yes,
said
yes.
in conceptualizing IRMSDP, it was we need you to understand each other so that
Mm,
when we are speaking, we speak from the same level. We speak
mm,
as equal partners. You
mm.
understand how our policies work.
Mm.
We understand how your policies work,
That
rather
is true.
than
Mm.
because the money is coming to you, you want me to
Yes, yes,
align our policies
yes, yes.
to your setting.
Oh
So
goodness.
who gets to decide what is researched? Who is
It,
setting the agenda for
yeah,
research, really?
yeah.
So those are some of the things that I'm excited about looking at. And Joy, you did mention the work we are currently doing around open research.
Yeah.
And how we are looking at how we are trying to, use science diplomacy to
Mm,
champion equitable knowledge systems
mm.
through global research publishing reforms.
Oh
And so
yes.
that's the other piece of work that I'm currently doing.
Mm,
And that's a very exciting field because it's a field I've really just ventured into.
mm.
And I feel very excited because now we are talking the future of open access
Oh
and
yes.
what that means for researchers in the global south,
Mm.
right? And
You
and
know,
looking
uh-huh.
at
Yes.
looking at key issues like open access as a driver for sustainable development,
Mm,
looking at power imbalance in global publishing.
mm,
I'm sure you're very aware of the dominance of northern-based publishers and frameworks in
mm,
academic
mm,
publishing, which
mm.
which simply reinforce a knowledge monopoly.
And
And
cannibalize
yes,
African publishers or even Global South publishers
yes, and actually marginalize them. The
completely.
risk, yes,
Mm.
yes, um, and so I'm really excited to be um, getting into this space to understand what are the African-led initiatives
Right.
and success stories,
Yes.
despite ongoing challenges.
And when you're talking about science diplomacy, three
What is
things
our
came.
role? Yeah.
Yes. So when
Mm,
you're talking about science diplomacy, a few points came to my mind. Thanks to colonial guilt, you know,
mm,
um, we are colonial guilt, and on our side now reinforcing our research sovereignty. You know,
mm.
we are demanding integrity in research practices and partnerships, and that
Yeah.
should actually be the core of science diplomacy. You know,
Yes.
we shouldn't look at science diplomacy as, yes, other than the diplomatic element of it. It needs to have a root with
Mm,
our colonial past, the consequences of that, and
yes.
how it has affected how research is conducted on the continent. The fact that we're actually talking about we need better research practices, we need integrity in our partnerships, it means that it was not even considered in the first place. It wasn't an issue in the first place
Mm,
until when we as researchers in the global south, not necessarily Africa, in the global south are demanding research sovereignty. We are
yes.
demanding respect in the kind of partnerships we are creating. So I think there is
Yeah.
a paradigm shift, but then we need to root in colonial guilt with the science diplomacy so that we are very clear what we want, so that it's not an issue of, yes, this is our past, we are sorry, but this is how we are going to work. No, it needs to be really on our terms, respecting our research sovereignty and
Yeah.
making sure that the partnership is equitable. So yeah, that those are the things that came to mind as you
Yeah.
explaining. Mm.
And I mean, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon because
Oh
there's
yeah.
lots um, of iniquities that we must call out
An
and balance.
ultra marathon. This is a very
Yes.
slow run.
I don't believe it's going to be as slow as we thought previously because
Right.
you and I both understand the movement to Diamond
Mm,
Open Access, right?
Yeah.
Um, I think there's been lots of conversations around um, how infrastructure has to be shared,
Right.
integrate open science into global agenda, and
Right.
it should be bi-directional, not, oh, you one area is open and the other one is closed to the open partner, but
Mm,
really being equally sharing,
mm-hmm,
you know, the
mm,
science, champion a global initiative on equitable publishing.
mm-hmm,
Can we have uh, what are the biases in
mm,
publishing and how can
mm,
we rectify those? I mean,
mm,
you did mention research integrity and often sometimes it's reduced to just the publishing. I
mm,
know publishing is a great piece of it because um, people want to put out their work, but they are often hindered by access to those journals.
mm,
Usually there are biases when
mm.
the name is Owango versus
Yeah.
some other name, you
Yes,
know.
that's true.
So
Mm.
how do we leverage science diplomacy to launch a global partnership or
Mm-hmm,
alliance dedicated to reforming research publishing?
mm-hmm,
How do we get bodies like the UN, funders, universities, publishing houses to commit to support Diamond open access journals and
Mm,
platforms so that we are able to have open peer review
mm,
uh, so that those biases can be broken, you know.
yes,
So how do we support African and Global South infrastructure?
right.
Uh, how do we get funding from including from international bodies to invest in the digital and institutional infrastructure for open science in Africa?
Yeah,
How do we do this so that we change the narrative around
yes,
the percentage of production coming out of Africa?
right.
So these are some of the things that I'm now thinking around, and I can uh, just share with you. The Science for Africa Foundation
Mm,
partners with F1000 on our open access publishing called
mm,
Open Research Africa.
mm.
And you were part of the team that
Oh, yes,
we've been working with
yes.
to do a landscape analysis to understand who else to partner with, how else to make
Mm,
open access really accessible for
mm,
for the African partners. How do
mm,
we make publishing equitable, and how
mm.
do we go forward
Right.
and and transition to Diamond Open Access, free to publish and free to access?
Mm-hmm.
So this is a phase of transition I'm excited to be part of, and I
Right.
think this journey um, will lead us to eventually getting into equitable research collaborations,
Yeah.
and also importantly increasing knowledge production on the continent and knowledge utilization.
Okay. So now,
Yeah.
looking ahead, where do you see the biggest opportunities for collaboration between African research managers, funders, and communicators to build research ecosystems that last? And have you noticed any encouraging shifts in how funders or institutions are valuing African-led research management?
Oh, that's a very good one. So one thing I should say is I'm part of I represent the Science for Africa Foundation on the Essence uh, group, which is a group of
Right.
funders that fund health research,
Okay.
and we have a working group on research management. And it's very exciting at the last Essence meeting in Washington, D.C. in
Mm,
February of this year, where all the funders agreed and resolved that
mm,
research management is critical and that it should be funded as its own item rather than as an overhead.
mm,
What this means is that
mm,
they will put across resources, they will allow budgeting for research management
mm,
as a line item because they recognize the importance of building capacity for research management, especially in the global South.
right.
Because they also realize that you can't have research excellence without the
Mm,
research management
yes.
component, because the research managers are creating the environment for the research excellence. You
Mm,
can't have the excellence without the support of the research managers. So that's very exciting, and many funders across the globe have really recognized the importance of building this capacity in the global South. So that's one exciting bit.
okay.
The second exciting bit is that we are growing a cadre of professionals because, like I said, I stumbled into research management, that's been what's happening. But at the moment, there are partners on the continent who are offering professional courses for research managers, meaning we are going to grow a cadre of professionals
Right.
that will then be looking after our research enterprise.
Right.
On the collaboration with science communicators, maybe one thing I should highlight is that under research management, it's a spectrum of functions, and some of which are research collaborations and partnerships, research communication and engagement,
Right.
and which of course include dissemination and engagement with communities, engagement with industry, engagement
Right.
with policymakers. And so in growing the research management profession, I should say that we are also promoting research communication or science communication, because it is part of the spectrum of functions that form what we refer to as research management.
Mm.
And so for me, that's really exciting, and I see the profession growing. Things have changed. I was at a conference recently, and I could see many abstracts from the Global South, and I was particularly interested in those that came from Africa, because I mean, I keep looking out for those, and that there's more knowledge production in this space. And so thinking about building a body of knowledge on research management that actually goes beyond the continent and taps into the global expertise,
Right.
that really is exciting for me, because our knowledge is useful beyond our borders. And
Right.
for me, that's really powerful.
Okay. And that's it. Thank you so much, Alan. This has been a very, very interesting conversation. And I believe we could end up talking for hours. Thanks for your insight and also your passion about research management, especially the integrity aspect of research management and partnerships. Thank you so much for making time to
Thank
join us in Mazungumzo.
Thank you, Joy. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to share my thoughts and the vision for the work we are doing at the Science for Africa Foundation.
Fantastic. Have a good day. Bye.
To you too. Bye.
Thanks for joining us on today's episode of Mazungumzo podcast. Be sure to subscribe and follow us on all our channels for more updates and for candid stories by researchers, policymakers, higher education leaders, and innovators on their journeys. See you in our next episode.